Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. As people start entering, I want to just welcome everyone to the fourth installment for 2025 of the Startup Academy. My name is Jennifer Lee, and I'm a partner at GSV Ventures. As a brief introduction for those of you who might be new to this series, the Startup Academy is something that GSV started a few years ago to support startups in our ecosystem throughout the year beyond the ASU GSV Summit. The whole purpose of this series is to help founders learn from some of the best in early education, K-12, higher ed, and corporate learning spaces. You can check out past sessions on our YouTube and GSV TV webinar page. And as a brief overview today, we will have about roughly 25-minute discussion with our two experts, hear a few words from our partner, Naomi at Cooley, and then save some time for Q&A at the end. So please drop in your questions into the chat box throughout. Before we get started, I also want to give a huge shout out and thank you to our partner and sponsor, Cooley, for making this series possible and for sharing their expertise on each of these topics as well. All right, so today we are super excited to be talking about the growing and very hot family choice market and to have a very transparent and practical conversation around education savings accounts, or ESAs, as well as any other programs fueling growth in the family choice space. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our two great speakers who are going through that very journey themselves and have decades of experience navigating both alternative forms of education and the application of technology in K-12. So first off, I have Christine Glandorf, who is the BD lead at AtSchool, which is arguably one of the largest online learning platforms for kids and teens to learn anything through live small group chats. Christine has specifically drove their go-to-market on ESAs and has jokingly spent enough time to earn a PhD in educational choice and helping families use ESAs. We also have John Danner, who is the CEO and co-founder of Flourish Schools, an AI-powered network of private micro schools focused on middle school children. I could use the whole session on John's background, but to poorly summarize, he's a serial entrepreneur, investor in EdTech, including co-founder and former CEO of Rocket Ship Education, co-founder and chairman of Project Read, Sparkspace, Zeal Learning, and originally NetGravity in the tech world. Welcome, John and Christine.
Hello.
Hi.
Cool. So before we get on into like the nitty gritty of all your guys' hard-earned lessons on ESAs, I'll level set a little bit and start with, how do you think about framing the family choice space and the opportunities for builders and founders as it regards to ESAs? And maybe we'll kick it off first with you, John, and then Christine, we can go to you.
Sure. I mean, as you said, Jen, I think the ESA space is a pretty amazing space for founders because for the first time, families have wallets to spend on education. And as most of you know, consumer spend on education in the US is pretty abysmal otherwise, 2% of disposable income. So having people now have several $1,000s that they can spend on educational options of their choice is a big deal. I would just break down the opportunities into kind of three groups. One is helping parents figure out what's going on here, what ESA is, what their options are, how to sign up, et cetera. That's a big problem. We face it every day with Flourish. Most parents still have no idea that any of this is going on, other than in possibly the big states like Florida and Arizona that are farther along. But in most states, there's a big education process. So I think being part of that's one opportunity. Another opportunity is to sell products and services directly to parents. Now a parent, instead of paying, $10 an hour or $100 a month, might be able to be reimbursed for most or all of whatever you're providing. And so that's going to make the demand for it significantly higher, I think. The third is kind of our space, micro schools. We're starting a network of schools, which I think there are going to be a lot of micro school networks. And we act like other school purchasers, except probably with like 1/100th the bureaucracy. And we're actually able to buy things, and we are looking to be innovative and things like that. So I think all three of those opportunities are quite large in the ESA space.
Thank you, John. That was such a great introduction, and I broadly +1 everything that you shared. I think the color that I would add is it's amazing to be a part of these sort of webinars and see the momentum and folks waking up to ESAs. They have been around for a while, but the momentum really was in Arizona and Florida up until the last year or two. So now there are, I think, on last count, about 18 ESA programs, 19 when Texas goes live in this summer. But I think it's important for folks to know that these are new programs, and Florida has the biggest overall market with you see estimates between like 250 and 500,000, depending on how you break down the scholarships. But for reference, the next biggest market is Arizona with about 100,000 students, families in it. And then you've got a few programs that are around 45, 50K. So it is growing rapidly, but I think Arizona and Florida right now are the space that the places that have the most momentum. And I think that we'll see a lot of changes as these programs grow and evolve. And I think the other key thing for folks to understand is every ESA is different. I think when you know one ESA program, you know one ESA program. Many ESA programs really are vouchers, which I think for John and team is great for an organization that works directly with families who have sort of unbundled funds to spend. It just changes the dynamic of market entry. But those two programs I named up top, Arizona and Florida, they're very mature and they are true ESAs. And I think for those of us who are looking at going direct to consumer, not running a school, those markets are showing some of the most interesting, and I think show what folks hope the ESA space can be, which is a high quality education market. Research has shown that as families have access to these flexible funds, they're doing more unbundling and starting to mix and match and go and pull from a variety of providers. But I would say that that is evolving. And I would caution anyone here who's got an app or something that they're looking to bring directly to families to sort of proceed with caution and know that that is an evolving part of the market.
I actually want to dig into that a little bit more, Christine, because you kind of highlighted 18 states, 18 completely different set of rules and regulations and things to be mindful of. That can often be really overwhelming for a startup with limited time and limited mental bandwidth, right? Prioritization is key. So how would you suggest for an early stage founder that they think about dealing and managing kind of this patchwork of rules and regulation and still think about scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I think if you want to keep it really simple, focus on the markets that are largest and most laissez-faire. Arizona is the most laissez-faire. It's the second largest, but generally speaking, they've been on the forefront of being the most permissive in terms of allowable expenses. Florida's, I would call them somewhat more on the middle ground, but the opportunity size, given the number of families, is just so big that it's worth checking out. And then from there, sort of you can go on EdChoice. They have a great website with sort of the program size, and you can kind of rank your states. AI is great now. You can find all the handbooks online. And so my general hot tip is train a GPT on the handbooks and use that to guide sort of like, hey, does this look like an opportunity for us? And then sort of, I think the sweet spot is your product allowed without a lot of dialogue with the program managers or the Odysseys and ClassWallet, the vendors? And then is the program large? And focus on the places where those two things overlap.
And then is, thinking about the complexity from the builder vendor side of things, I mean, that's even harder to convey towards parents. And John, I know you've probably had some experience working with parents in the micro schools, and you talked about this too. How do you think, as one of the potential categories and areas for ESAs, how do you think about helping families understand that purchasing power through ESAs and navigating the process? Because I think communication to that stakeholder is probably as critical.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity because our number one problem as a micro school is people saying, well, gosh, what's a micro school? What's ESA? Like, they're just nobody, there are, I would say, homeschool parents are the most likely to have kind of a clue about what's going on, especially in the two big states, but in general, parents have no idea, especially if you think about what's happening here. There's a huge middle class that's kind of not been in the game. They can't really afford $20,000 a year schools, but they've got some disposable income. And so they can spend on micro schools and other things, but that's the segment that really doesn't seem to be educated at all about what's going on. And so I think tools that help them kind of navigate and understand, what the law is, what applies to them, what their educational options are, those are all great opportunities for people. And it seems like, at least in Florida and Arizona, they're doing some stuff themselves, but there's really a wide open opportunity to make it simpler and easier for parents to figure things out.
Yeah, I think one thing that you have to think of is I think we're excited that these programs are passing, but I don't necessarily think that the infrastructure is there to promote and to simplify the programs for families. Often what you'll find, I mentioned those handbooks before, that's what families get. They get a 50, 100-page handbook, and then you see these Facebook groups popping up. And I think that's always a sign that there's a market opportunity, right? When people are running to little, like Arizona ESA networking or Step Up for Students Unlocked, most of the places that these families are going to get their answers about what is going to be approved, what this new rule is, it's all in these small Facebook groups where people are dialoguing. And I think that just illustrates for you, John, how big of a gap there is. And the gap is most certainly felt for families where in many ways the need is most acute. So low income families, and then the uptake for these programs is highest in many cases among families with learners with unique needs, who I think frankly are being pushed out of some traditional programs. And then they're sort of like to the point of exasperation where they're willing to sort of go out on a limb and try something new. And then they're finding these communities and finding other families who can say, here's how I stack my education providers, which could include micro schools, therapists, et cetera. So I think that in and of itself just shows you how big of an opportunity there is to help families who are starting to customize education in really unique ways because of this fund. But I think about it every day because, man, it is so, we hear from users and families all the time that it is a very complex system to navigate. And frankly, it's the biggest barrier to growth for these programs because both in terms of getting families off the bench who aren't already homeschooling or aren't already using a private school, but also people staying in the programs. Because if you've got a program with an 6 months wait time for a reimbursement, there are a lot of families who just are not going to be able to sustain that sort of proposition.
Yeah, and what I feel like often is most helpful for folks, because I think you guys are highlighting a real issue, is like tactically, any specific examples that either of you can give around how you've been able to kind of work with or communicate to parents this opportunity.
Well, I think what Christine said about Facebook groups, I mean, I always work with founders on this in general, like the way you find the early adopters and the people with the problem is to find those groups and the people that are doing the most chatting. And it's always been amazing to me, if you're actually adding something of value to that group, you're often kind of well embraced. So I think that's absolutely the first thing I would do is just find where those groups are and kind of listen and, kind of reach out to people and say, hey, can I tell you what I'm thinking about doing?
Yeah, I'd plus one that's been an early factor for us was realizing, hey, there's all these Facebook groups where these users are there and they're talking about this. And then, the power users are literally the power ESA users are your best friends. So we've worked with a lot of, and to be honest, a lot of them are moms who, I work with really closely to understand the whole experience. And I will name like the vendors, the class wallets, the Odysseys. It's a little bit of a black box. So if you aren't sort of sitting side by side with real ESA users, you're missing a lot of the big picture. So my most tactical recommendation is if you want to go to market an ESA, find the ESA users and really understand how they're working with the programs, how they're working with Class Wallet and Odyssey. I will name the data shows that most families are actually seeking reimbursement, like a very small percent, like 20 to 25% of the funds are flowing through these vendor marketplaces. So there's a lot of opportunity there if you can kind of help families reduce friction through the reimbursement process. But yeah, I think just tactically, I live in Boston, Massachusetts. We're never getting an ESA. So I am very mindful that I need to work closely with people in Florida, in Arizona to understand what the day-to-day of using that looks like. And then, to be honest, we work to publish a lot of content that demystifies the ESA. Because if you go out there and you just go to the government website, you're gonna find a lot that's left to interpretation. So we do a lot to try to help families make sense of sort of the confusing information that's out there.
Quick reminder to folks, for those who are listening, please go ahead and to use that ask a question if you have any questions. I feel like there's probably a lot of nuggets and details here that people would love to get into. John, I'm going to actually focus on a little bit. I mean, I've tons of interviews, and in many of them, particularly after you finish Rocket Ship, you said that once you left, you'd never do school networks again, right? I'm curious, what's different? What's changed your mind? I don't know if the growth of ESAs has influenced it or other funding sources changed. I'd love to hear. And I know you also did a recent LinkedIn post on why the market is different today and why investors should consider school chains versus in the past.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. When I left Rocket Ship, I was completely burned out on school networks. What I've realized doing Flourish is that a lot of that was charter burnout, and we could talk for a whole session about why charters are a really frictiony process in education. But the main reason that I'm building Flourish is that when I was doing the last two software companies, Project Read and Sparkspace, what I noticed is really good uptake of AI tools in schools. Schools are definitely experimenting with things, but a lot of times what they're doing is very incremental type usage, the way that EdTech has kind of always been used, where it's like I've got papers to grade or a group of students to meet with, or I'm tired on a Friday. I was a teacher for 3 years, so I have high empathy for tired on Fridays. Why don't I just put the kids on Project Read or something like that? But it's not like Project Read or Sparkspace is like my core instruction for reading or writing. And I really wanted to see what a classroom would look like where you actually let AI do the things that AI can do, and then figure out what the rules are for the teacher and other people at the school. Given that AI is good at kind of direct instruction type stuff, and given that most teachers decide to be teachers because they want to connect with students, not because they want to become a master of reading pedagogy.
I appreciate that opportunity, and really the idea of that teachers have the opportunity here to become around the motivation and helping students think about the flourishing, as opposed to, hence the name Flourish, their school, beyond just kind of how do I structure a lesson plan, right? Yeah. And how do I do that?
Becoming more human. Hopefully becoming more human is what's going to happen in classrooms.
And I think that's a theme that we've heard resonate, particularly as AI continues to dominate the landscape and the conversation. Christine, focusing on kind of the opportunity and the scale that OutSchool has reached over time, would love to, you mentioned kind of the opportunity for unbundling there and bringing more folks into the ecosystem and utilizing these funds, those who, bringing in new and diverse populations in there. How do you think about ESAs opening the door to kind of a more market-based learning ecosystem, and what's OutSchool's role in that?
Yeah, so I'd like to say that ESAs rely on having a high quality education marketplace. And as you mentioned at the top of this call, OutSchool really is one of the first to have a high quality education service marketplace. And when you look at what we see in the ESA is that there's really a gap there. So you can go and find books or instructional materials on Lakeshore or on Amazon. And, you can find, as recently as last month, Arkansas put out their list of top vendors, and you'll see Apple, Amazon, a lot of those places high on the list. But then there's such a long tail of service providers. We're really lucky that, because we have 100,000 classes, 6,000 educators, and we really are an option for families regardless of location, that we've aggregated, I think, a lot of demand that way. But you can just see the long tail of service providers, of small curriculum providers, of karate studios, to just understand that this is a continuing need. And the class wallets and the Odysseys and the Step Up for Students are trying to do it. I think that they have a lot of jobs to do, right? Like their number one client is the state and ensuring compliant use of the funds. So I think that's always going to be in tension, right, with a modern first class marketplace. And so I think that's kind of one of the areas that we're looking at, is like, how do we continue to build on our strength as a marketplace? But also, I think we're just trying to continue to get better at helping families connect with great educators and great learning experience. And I think I'll be transparent, it's still something we're getting better at. With 100,000 classes and 6,000 teachers, we get feedback all the time from people that they're like, it's too much, I'm overwhelmed. So I think we've opened up choice. And when you open up choice, you're going to have that immediate reaction. Some people the early adopters are going to be like, yes, I've nailed it. I think what we're seeing right now is the homeschoolers, the unschoolers, the people who are with a child with unique needs, who really have to curate and unbundle because of the required amount of services to create an awesome experience for the child. They're really the bleeding edge. And now the question is, how do you get parents who've sort of, as John said, been sitting on the bench to come along and figure out what the right level of customization looks like for them? And so I think micro schools are wonderful because they're starting to open up sort of more of a hybrid model, where because their costs are low, you can still go to school for like 80% of your needs, but maybe you don't take coding at your micro school, and that's something you take on Outschool. Or maybe what we're also seeing in Florida is that public schools are starting to engage with the ESAs, and they're breaking up their offerings such that a family could say, you know what, I actually think our public school has a great chemistry program. I'm not going to use them for all of my needs, but I'm going to engage with them for chemistry. And so that for me is the most exciting piece in the future. And it's just starting to come together. But I think we all are craving that level of flexibility. And I think those of us who can figure out to enable that, which is really hard, it's not easy, I'm not saying we've nailed it, that's going to be, I think, that's the breakthrough I'm most excited to look at.
Awesome. John, any other additions that you want to add in terms of like, we heard Christine's thoughts around where's the greatest opportunity, particularly around technology, to be able to help customize the bundling and the offering that students can have for additional choice. Any additional thoughts on your side as to like what's the most interesting application here, particularly as we think about all the new technology that's being opened up and available through AI?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how I'd rank them, but I definitely think helping parents navigate and choose is a huge opportunity. I also think that really for the first time, we're going to unlock a whole bunch of parents that really never would have bought education services before in any way. They just didn't have the money to do it. So I think building AI and other education products that you sell directly to parents is going to be a great market. Outschool obviously does it with live classes, which are awesome. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of AI offerings that do that. But I think, as a founder, you really have to master this ecosystem to do that well. You have to understand the laws and the places that you're going to be. You have to understand where people are and where they're talking about it. You have to get on all the marketplaces. So I think, take a state or two, do it well, and try to see, are people interested in your product at the ESA reimbursed price? And if that works, that's great. I would also just make a pitch for micro school services. I think I wrote a blog piece about this a couple of weeks ago. I think that in the charter world, there were a lot of companies that built quite large companies on services for the charter school world. So, like Revolution Foods and food, or Presence Learning and special ed, there were just a ton of them that built Hop, Skip, Drive and transportation, that built quite good services for charters. And I think the same thing's going to happen with micro schools. As Christine said, I think that the idea with micro schools is maybe they're not going to do everything for everybody anymore, right? You've got kind of a specific purpose, a small set of students, and so you're trying to do really great for those students, but you may not offer all of the services that the charter school down the street offers. So having services that you're either selling into the micro schools or you're partnering with the micro schools so that people can get access to them, I think is going to be a really good market too.
Awesome. So I'm hearing a call out to all those attendees that you can come and pitch John with specific services when you're ready. Awesome. I want to bring on Naomi, who's a partner at Cooley at this time, to also be able to share her thoughts, particularly around the laws and regulations around ESAs.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Naomi May. I am a partner in Cooley's education technology practice, where we advise hundreds of companies who are truly passionate about building the future of education. I think I am truly one of the luckiest lawyers in the country because I do have the privilege of working alongside so many founders and operators who are navigating the complexities of all of these state and local and federal legal frameworks. And we conceptualize these structures not primarily as obstacles, as I think you heard from our panelists today, to be overcome, but truly as opportunities to leverage into market opportunities. And before I turn you back over to the panel, I know that's really what you're here for today. I wanted to make sure that you are aware of a resource that Cooley makes available free to founders. It is called Cooley Go. You can find it at cooleygo.com. There are some guidance articles, some document generator, and various collections of materials, including data on financings, ranging from Series Seed all the way through Series E. We have various blog posts arranged by every stage of your company. We have it arranged by starting your company to creating and protecting, building your team, raising funds, how to create your board and advising cohort, selling. If you haven't seen what's available there, I'd encourage you to check it out. And before turning you back over to Jennifer, I thought I'd leave you with a couple of quick thoughts on this topic of school choice broadly. Commonly, first of all, when you see a new legislative concept, you also see legal challenges. And what is interesting, I think, about the ESA structure, specifically from a state constitutional perspective, I was thinking about this as the panelists were talking, is that while it might be maybe more politically challenging on the front end, I think we've seen that play out, it is looking like that there might be maybe fewer successful challenges on the back end. And that's really because of the way the constitutional challenges to ESAs are playing out on the back end, the way that education is framed in state constitutions. On the federal front, one of the areas I'm getting a lot of questions right now about is the One Big Beautiful Bill, OB3, and scholarship granting organizations, which could allow families earning up to 300% of the median income in their specific region to cover tuition at participating private schools, but also other qualified educational expenses. Those might be fees, those might be tutoring, educational therapy expenses, education technology. But I did just want to note, as I think a lot of folks are thinking about how they might leverage those opportunities, there will be quite a few significant hurdles here, and it will be quite a long time before those, I think, can be leveraged effectively. There still is a federal rulemaking that has to occur. States will have to opt in. It will not be mandatory for the states. Donors will have to donate to these scholarship funds. The incentive structure built in here is that these donors can lower their tax liability for the donations that they donate to the accredited scholarship granting organizations. One of the major questions is kind of who will qualify as these SGOs, and also the question of whether schools will want to participate because of the likely strings attached. For example, a lot of the customary strings that are attached to kind of being the conduit for federal funding. So a lot of questions remain there. It is possible that there will be a lot of opportunities, but we will see as those things play out, and look forward to thinking about all of those topics with you in the months and years ahead. So Jennifer, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Naomi. We've gotten quite a few interesting questions in the chat, a few actually particularly around Texas. So I'm going to start there, which is, how do you think about what's happening in Texas, and any insights on that market for vendors getting plugged into serving parents and students who will eventually be able to tap into the Texas ESAs program?
I'm happy to start. I've been thinking a lot about this. So first of all, the rules are still being written, or the regulations haven't been released yet. So I think on our side, we're sort of waiting. We've seen the law is out there, so you can go and have a great partner like Naomi or your own legal team sort of look at what's been, what passed, but frankly, the rubber hits the road when the regulations get written. So I'm not holding my breath that just because some things looked relatively favorable in the law, that won't mean things will change through the regulatory process. So I think it's a little early to say for sure if it'll be like truly laissez-faire or somewhere in the middle. If I'm guessing, it's almost certainly going to be somewhere in the middle. But we should hear that pretty soon. So don't sleep on sort of your Texas EFA alerts. I think the only other dynamic I would name for those of us who sell directly to families is they took an approach where families that homeschool only have $2,000 to spend on only get $2,000 to spend, which is significantly less than a state like Arizona, where all families qualify for like an average of $8,000. So that's a pretty different dynamic. There's some other interesting stuff going on where it's unclear, to your point, Naomi, about ECA, if all the private schools will opt in Texas, which could lead to more homeschoolers being funded. So I think that for me is sort of the thing I'm watching, and the thing I'm sort of like trying to manage expectation around internally, because when people saw Texas launched with $1 billion and 100,000, everyone's eyeballs went like, yay, it's all Texas all the time. But I will say that I've launched new states every year now at OutSchool, and every year they're always smaller, and I think have funkier regulations than I anticipated like 6 or 7 months before they went live. And now that changes, but I just would say, I would caution anyone from like putting all their eggs into the Texas basket, unless that's a space that you're already sort of like fully in, like if you're a local Texas provider, for example.
Yeah, I guess I would say that our general take is similar. The Arizona and Florida have had a long enough time that, like, as a vendor, you actually know what's going on, kind of most of the time. But all other states, including Tennessee, where we are with Flourish, and definitely including Texas, that's even earlier, that process of kind of like working everything out and actually getting people paid and having any kind of clarity often takes several years. It does not move at startup speed. It moves at government speed. So for schools, which I'm not sure any founders on the line are really thinking about doing, but for schools, the big states aren't actually that great to start schools in, because they have a huge amount of kind of interested supply and existing supply a lot of times. So I think the smaller states, the newer states are more interesting. But if I was selling, software or other services direct to consumers, I'd absolutely be in the states that are established and not try to figure out, why Tennessee does crazy things the way that they do. So you've got enough problems in the ESA world going with the ones that are slightly less Wild West. One thing I wanted to note earlier about this whole space is that it is true that the blue states have not passed formal ESA, but they're kind of these corporate ESAs that actually exist, right? Where I don't know how many students in virtual schools in California, but it's a large number, and they get a stipend for spending on educational products as well. So that's another area that as a founder, I would think about, because families in those states don't have nearly the same options as in Arizona or Tennessee a lot of times, and could be a lot more interested in kind of innovative services. So I wouldn't cross off the blue states. I just kind of look into like, what are the options for parents actually when you look at kind of where the stipends are and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Naomi, you didn't mention this with ECA. It's still a ways out because it will be live in 2027. But our understanding is that there's nothing prohibiting families who are still enrolled in a public school from using ECA.
That's correct.
And I actually think for those of us in the outschool sort of space, or those who are looking to sell directly to families, that's where potentially the big windfall could come if sort of the stars align with SGOs being interested in supporting that.
That's right.
But I think that the reality is even in ESE states, most families do remain with their public schools. And so I think that we're watching that. If I was going to choose between watching Texas or watching ECA, I think in some ways that provision and how that comes together could be significantly more attractive than just a state like Texas.
Completely agree.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that thought. One question was around if perhaps any more additional information around the marketplaces, the vendor marketplaces such as ClassWallet or Odyssey, and more insights or thoughts around those providers.
Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get on them is my first bet. I will say that in some cases, to your early question, Jennifer, about how do you strategize? If you get on them, sometimes they'll just turn you on in states where that's the bonus of being on and approved. So I think you have to play ball. The thing that people need to understand is each state will have different dynamics for how families can use funds. In Arizona, as an example, there are four different ways families can pay for something with ESA funds. They can get reimbursed. Some families can use a debit card. The vast majority of transactions happen on ClassWallet in direct pay, which incurs a 2% fee for families. But that's where basically a family gets an invoice from a vendor, typically a school or a karate studio. And then ClassWallet pays the vendor directly. The data I've seen is that reimbursement and debit card and direct pay are the majority of the transactions. But for vendors, that direct pay is not super attractive because it can take you a while to get paid. So that leaves the marketplace, which is where we've seen transparently the most growth, because in that marketplace, families can directly directly in quotation marks, their funds to you. There's some back end stuff that is not as seamless as you would imagine it would be in the 21st century. But the pro there is that families aren't out of pocket. So we found that most of our new buyers do come from those marketplaces because those are families who wouldn't have found us because they can't afford to spend out of pocket. So if you're looking to grow new buyers, you absolutely do want to get into those marketplaces, but you also need to understand the ecosystem of all the other ways that families can buy and pay for you, and sort of decide how am I going to tell people the best way to pay for my services. So yeah, I think the last thing I'll name, the marketplaces are okay. I'm going to be generous. Okay, there's a lot both for vendors and then for families in terms of friction. So I think it's worth it to get in there, but I wouldn't necessarily like point your whole strategy around just being in the marketplace. And then the last recommendation I would give is Class Wallet, Odyssey, Step Up for Students. They have a lot of constituents they're serving. Their number one constituent is the state. Next is the parent, and vendors are like all very, very, very far behind. So I wouldn't rely on them to advocate for you if you need to sort of like navigate like what bucket you fall into. One of the challenges we've seen in the ESA space is they're designed, and often they get like the public school to help them think of what the categories should be. And many of the newer tools don't live neatly in a box. And there's not really a strong incentive for Class Wallet or Odyssey to advocate for you to be sort of positioned in a different box. And so you're going to need partners like Naomi, or go directly to the state program, and you're not selling, but you're advocating for the value that you can bring for families and for the reasons why you should be considered XYZ. And depending on how you get categorized, there could be more or less friction for parents in buying you. So I think that it's a long way of saying you sort of have to do, like, getting turned on in the vendor marketplace is just step one. And I think you need to do your own homework and advocate for yourself to ensure that there's the least amount of frictions for people when they're buying you.
That's a great segue to kind of another area we've gotten a couple questions on. And so it's kind of the last question that we're going to put out there is around this marketing and some of the issues that you guys had raised at the very beginning of the call, right? Which is parent awareness. So very tactically, anything about channels or other ways in which you feel it's that you can access large volume of parents and increase awareness at scale.
I mean, what we've found so far, I think Christina said something earlier that's kind of obvious, but everybody who cares about this should do it. Write your blog on how ESA works in the states you care about, right? You need to start ranking for that. But we've been amazed really at how many parents want to find out more about this, like they've heard or whatever. And so as long as you're kind of out there, you're in the groups, you've got kind of some SEO ranking, like people are going to find you. You do a webinar like this once a week, once every 2 weeks, and they're well attended because people are really interested in knowing what's going on. But you just kind of have to do the work. It's like Christine said, it's like, getting in the marketplace is the first step, but really then you have to get the marketing to build the awareness for what this whole thing is and then what you do.
Yeah, and I'll just plus one. I think a lot of this is growing off of on our side, it grows off of the backbone of like the homeschool market, and that's always been very word of mouth heavy. And people are meeting at park days, or they're going to school choice fairs. And when you're on you're innovating, there's always like risk, and families are concerned. They want to know that they're doing right by the child. And so they really care about hearing from another family that XYZ worked. And so, if you can build that flywheel of families recommending you, saying, hey, they're great, my child loved it, and they're easy to use your ESA funds on, those are sort of like the two ideal endorsements. And then the last thing, I think you mentioned scale, Jennifer. I think I would just like caution anybody who's starting in ESAs when they think about like scale, because again, the two largest ESA programs, Florida and Arizona, again, Florida has, they quote like 500,000. The homeschooling and sort of unique abilities component of that scholarship is more like 250,000 students. Arizona, the second biggest, is 100,000. They don't have a perfect number on homeschooling, but it's probably like 20K. And then there's families with incremental spend who have learners with unique needs. But we're not like, if you really want scale, like I think I'd push you to look in other areas right now, because you're still talking about these programs aren't huge yet. So I think that's just one. And then I think I mentioned before, the next biggest programs are like 45,000. And again, you can take the 45,000 and estimate the number of homeschoolers or the numbers of families who aren't just taking those funds and going directly into a private school. So I think that's evolving, and I expect in 5 years we'll be saying something pretty different. But as of today, I think scale is relative.
Yeah, I guess the only comment I'd make is, speaking for really early stage founders, those are huge markets for somebody that has 0 customers today. Not huge markets for OutSchool, but huge markets for a lot of the founders on the call. And I think it's, one thing I always tell founders is, like, if you can own a market or have like just huge amount of love within a smaller space, you're really doing well. So I think in that way, kind of ESAs fit early stage startups pretty well.
Awesome. Thank you so much to everybody for all those insights. I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground, everything from like where are the kind of 3 categories of opportunities in the ESA market, how to approach the patchwork of regulations and programs across 18 states and potentially more in the future. And finally, also on just what is the understanding go-to-market and making sure you have the payment pathways set up for parents, which at the end of the day is still about know your market, target well, and own it, as John said so succinctly. So I just want to thank everybody again for joining, and encourage folks to keep sending questions and giving us feedback so we can make sure to bring other highly relevant content for the startup community going forward.
Thank you for having us, Jennifer.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.